Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this live stream. I'm back again with Mr. Trilobite. How you doing, bro?
Alhamdulillah, what about you?
Alhamdulillah. So today we're actually doing a book review, right? So this is one of the books that you have spoken to me about in the past, and we were discussing some weeks back when I was at your house when you were feeding me all that fruit. uh, and yeah, we were discussing doing like some book reviews, and this was one of the first things you wanted to cover. So who is this author and why is this book important to cover?
So his name is Saint George Mavat. He wasn't a saint, but that's just his name. And he wrote a book which took him about 10 years to finish. It's called On the Genesis of Species. It was a deliberate attack or a deliberate response to On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. So he published the book in 1871, which is the same year Darwin published his On the Descent of Man. And like I said, it took him 10 years. So throughout the 10-year period, because he's a biologist, he would, look for examples and study things and whatnot. And he would write in different journals, and then he collects them all and publishes that book in 1871. And it was a response to Darwin, not that he is not an evolutionist. No, he was an evolutionist. He accepts evolution, but it's more like him being what we now call the intelligent design. It's basically the same thing. He says, look, I don't believe in this version of Darwinism. I don't believe in this materialism. And I most certainly don't accept the young earth creationist view either. You see what I mean? So he says, I'm in the middle, where there is guidance, there is what we now call orthogenetic evolution. And by orthogenetic evolution, what he means is that evolution is guided. There is some guidance. It's not just purely random. So anyway, he wrote that book and explains why he disagrees with Darwin. And
Sure. So
yeah,
just before we get into it, so we're talking about Darwin's lifetime, right? Because he
correct.
published the book in 1871,
Yes.
and Darwin was still alive. So Darwin must have known of this guy.
Oh yeah, he hated this guy. In fact, they were friends at start. They were fine with each other, good buddies. But then when he started to write against Darwin, against his ideas, not against Darwin per se, just against evolution, he thinks it's just wrong. He thinks it's not just random and whatnot.
Yeah.
Darwin started to feel a bit iffy about this guy, right?
Yeah.
And he started to like fund people to respond to him, right? Because Darwin doesn't want to respond to him directly. Now he does later on, but initially he doesn't because the book is very powerful. It's a powerful response. He lays out Darwin's understanding very well, which is pretty good as well. And
Yeah. So
something to go for it.
so just on that point, I wanted to highlight that even today, you would find on the Cambridge website his work being showcased. And
Yes, that's the one. Yeah.
one of the things that's always held against people is, oh, they believe in God and this silliness. Well, we should be consistent and say, well, they're atheists, so we shouldn't trust them, right? If we're to go down that line. But anyway,
Exactly.
it says here's something quite interesting. I think you can see my screen when I've shared it.
I
Yeah,
can.
here we are.
Yes, yes.
So, regardless of his religious views, Mavard engaged seriously and intelligently with the details of natural selection and formulated one of the few concrete objections to Darwin's theory, pointing out its failure to account for the incipient stages in the development of anatomical structures and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the reason why I'm highlighting this isn't some quack. Yeah, this is somebody
No.
who even
Mm,
today is recognized as a serious
yes.
objector to Darwin's theory, who at least, like you pointed out rightfully, Mr. Trilobite, um, understood natural selection and understood the implications of the theory and how it works and what the consequences are.
Exactly, because what he says is that if we take natural selection, like theoretically, let's take it as the truth.
Yeah,
Well, the consequences or the predictions of it should be X, Y, Z, but we don't see X, Y, Z. We
yeah,
see A, B, C.
Yeah.
So then he starts to respond to those critiques, because people will critique you, and they did, and he responds to them. And we can talk about it later on. But like I said on the Cambridge website, that he expounds on the incipient structures, which is basically irreducible complexity. That's literally what it is, just another word for it. So they called it at that time the Mevat's dilemma, but it
Mm.
really is Michael Behe's irreducible complexity. It really, it's nothing else.
But just to elucidate a little bit about his own personal view, he's still an evolutionist, right?
100%. He just
Yeah.
believed it was orthogenetic, meaning it was guided. There is
So, like,
some intelligence.
would you say it's a cruder version or a primitive version of the theistic evolutionist today, like Francis Collins?
Ooh, does does Colin believe that evolution can be guided, or does he just say God exists and evolution just
Actually,
happened
no,
and God
no,
allowed it?
no. That sorry, that was my mistake. Not Francis Collins. Francis Collins actually denies theistic evolution.
Yeah,
Say Ropi Kajonin.
I don't know him.
Okay, so um, let me put it another way. We have Asa Gray, right?
He was also an early guy who disagreed with Darwin. Yes, yes, I was going to mention
Yeah.
him today, but go for it.
So okay, so forget these names. His view is there's some intelligence behind evolution. It's not
Yes,
all random. That's
correct.
a
It directs
minimalistic
it.
commitment,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so they
Okay.
believe evolution is directional, it's going somewhere. Someone is doing it. So he talks about it. He says that according to Darwin's view of natural selection,
Yeah.
the mutation and the changes are directional in all. Sorry, it's in all directions, whilst his view is it's in a one direction. You see, um, so you've got that. Obviously, you got the idea of what do you call it? The ethics as well. He talks about ethics. He's not the only one, but he talks about ethics. It can't be grounded in animals. It has to be grounded somewhere else. So this is standard. A lot. Even till this day, people use this argument as well. And what else he talks about? He talks about the classic homology versus homoplasy. No surprise. Um, the irreducible complexity as well. He gives examples. He also gives examples of, like, okay, you guys believe that over many years, only the beneficial traits remain, yet we see things that are clearly not beneficials, right? And for example, he gives an example of this animal. It's a monkey-like animal, but it only has four fingers. It's literally missing a finger. You can clearly see it's missing. It's like somebody chopped it off, but that's just how it is. Now this thing must have evolved out of a creature with five fingers, if evolution was true. Yet this thing has four fingers. It lost a finger. There's no way there was a survival to this, a survival advantage to this. No way. But that's a dilemma. How do you explain this? And if you're going to use just so stories, which he also refutes, then it just goes worse, right? It gets worse over time, over millions of years. But anyway, so that's briefly who he is. So that's his work, and he was a Catholic as well, which is important to mention, because the reason why he's forgotten, not only because he wrote this book and
Yeah.
because he disagreed with what you could say materialistic evolution, but he also disagreed with the Catholic Church, right? And in fact, I'll read a statement that he wrote at the time. He said in his work, after mature reflection and many struggles, I had come to the conclusion that the Roman Catholic Church must tolerate a transforming process of evolution with respect to many of its dogmas, or sink by degrees to an effete and insignificant body composed of ignorant persons, a mass of women and children, and a number of mentally effeminate men. My cultured friends all agree as to the necessity of freedom to regard the Bible from the point of view of the higher criticism. So you can clearly see this guy is he claims to be a Catholic, but he's also saying the Catholic Church has to change. I mean, is he a Catholic? I don't know, but it just sounds weird to me. But as you can see, the way he sort of says that these dogmas can only be accepted by women and children and feminized men, right? He says this is not what intelligent people would follow, right? The church has to change, it has to adopt these new things. And obviously, the new things, for example, evolution, right? Darwinism, or at least his version of Darwinism. And then he had a direct clash with the church when he rejected the eternal punishment of hell. Now, Catholicism, like Christianity in general, like Islam, like many other religions, believe in hell to be can be a permanent, eternal thing, right? Very few had rejected this. But Mavat says, no, I don't accept this. I believe hell is a happy place. Some people will be punished in it, some people won't. And so they are eternally, happily damned in hell. It's the craziest idea. But I'm sure you've heard of it before. Why
No,
is it
no.
that Oh, you have. You've heard the idea where atheists say, well, if somebody committed a sin for a few years, why should they be eternally punished? Right?
Oh, oh, right, right. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
I thought you meant I've heard the idea of hell being a happy place.
oh no, no, not that. Yeah. So his response to that is, well, hell could be a happy place, and basically he redefines hell for us and for many others. Hell is a place of suffering, but for Mavat, hell is basically not you not seeing heaven. That's it. That's hell. Punishment is part of it, but it's not this necessary thing and definitely not eternal. It's just parts of it, right? So the main thing about hell is you not seeing heaven, you not seeing God. That's it. There you go. That's hell. You see what I mean? And it's like, all right, whatever. And so the Catholic Church, logically, excommunicated him. So he was rejected by the materialist evolutionists that took over, right? And then he was rejected by his own church anyway. And then he was a forgotten man. No one remembered him. Pretty much once he died, that's it. His legacy died with him. And the only reason why, the reason why I'm reading about him is because I noticed, like Stephen Jay Gould and others, they were talking about him, and I was like, wow, this it's an interesting guy who was critiquing evolution at that time. I didn't know this. And then when I read his book, and I was pretty surprised to learn that such a guy existed with a lot of knowledge, a lot of illustrations in the book as well. It's an interesting guy. But that's
Yeah.
a summary of his life. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so he is at best a quasi-intelligent design proponent. At worst, he's a heretic from all perspectives. He's a
Exactly.
heretic from a Darwinian perspective. He's also a heretic from a Catholic perspective.
Yep.
So he's breaking all the norms, right?
Yes. 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 He's not just I'm a Catholic Bible believing guy, and here I am writing against
That
Darwin.
gives
No, it's
more, don't you think that gives more credibility to his ideas because he's willing to challenge
everything.
mainstream science and mainstream theology at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
He's a,
That's
I guess he's an independent thinker.
He definitely was. Yeah, it was very unique at his time. The closest one would be Wallace, right? And he too was forgotten for some time until now, sort of recently. All right, it's sort of being remembered now. People talking about him, but
Mm,
even when people do remember Wallace, they remember him as a materialist, even though he's not,
yeah.
and that's dangerous, right? Because he wasn't a materialist. The whole point of Wallace is he's a spiritualist. His
Yeah.
idea of evolution is a spiritualist version of evolution. It wasn't a materialist version.
Hmm.
So, it's interesting that even when we remember someone, they remember him wrongly. But
Okay.
anyway,
So we've
yeah.
covered why he wrote the book. Obviously, a challenge to Darwin. What are the central points that he raises against Darwinian evolution?
Okay, so the first one would be like literally it's the second chapter, but it's the first point. So the first chapter is the introduction, second chapter, the incipient structure. So that is what we now call irreducible complexity, or you could call it Mevat's dilemma. So he gives an example. He gives several examples, but you've got the dilemma of the giraffe's neck. That, all right, you've got a giraffe, and you ask an evolutionist, how did the giraffe get its long neck? Well, it got the long neck because there was drought, and the drought didn't affect the trees, only affected the plants, on the ground, but not the trees. And so the animal has to keep stretching its neck, and over millions of years, you got a long neck. Mevat was like, all right, well, let's take it to, let's examine this hypothesis of yours. So he says, all right, so there's no shrubs, no grass, nothing. There's only trees, and therefore the animal, like the giraffe, has to extend its neck, and through many many generations, they have a long neck. No problem. So wouldn't that affect all the creatures in the vicinity? Shouldn't all the creatures in that vicinity have the same have the same evolution of a long neck? Shouldn't lions, tigers, all of them, they all should have long necks because they all live in the same environment. Yeah, they don't, and yet they still exist, but they've existed then as well. So he brings the problem of how come they didn't, have long necks, but the giraffe did. So then you'd argue, well, giraffe only eats leaf, whilst they eat, uh, meat and whatnot. It's like, all right, forget that. What about the vegetarian animals? I mean, they they still exist. They got short necks as well. And so no matter what you choose, it's always a dilemma. So if these herbivores still exist, that means they ate grass. That means there was food. That means there was no selection pressure to get a long neck, right? Um, so he argues from that point. But then, as I told you as well, we still have short-necked giraffes anyway, although it's a sort of a mixture between neck and a zebra. But anyway, in any case, it exists. It's a giraffe-like creature with a short neck. So for him, he sort of he literally destroys the just so story. Your just so story doesn't make any sense, because if it was true, we expect certain predictions, certain outcomes we just don't see in this world. So that's problem number one. Another problem he mentions is the problem of evolving multiple parts at the same time. Now, having a long neck is, I mean, a lot of people just imagine the neck being stretched, but it's not just a stretched neck. It's the bone density, it's the blood vessels, it's the nervous system. It's so many things must evolve at the same time correctly. Any wrong would kill this creature. Yet somehow, by pure chance, pure random, multiple parts of the neck just happens to evolve so correctly. That doesn't make any sense. For him, this is a mathematical challenge, and it's a big challenge. And again, intelligent designers, till this very day, they still make this argument as well. How do you explain multiple changes at the same time? You can't talk about a system by its part. The part doesn't explain the system, right? This creature is an emergent property of many things. You can't just
So
say, well, go
yeah, yeah. So
for it.
what if I was to play devil's advocate and push back against what you're saying by giving the example that, well, you have a building, right? And it
Mm,
looks irreducibly complex. How did the windows get up 2 meters high and this and that?
mhm.
But what you're missing is there was the scaffolding, which is no longer there. So things were built incrementally. So, going back to Michael Behe's example of the mousetrap, people like Kenneth Miller would say things like, well, there's a whole scaffolding gradual incremental increase in complexity, and all of those parts have disappeared. That's
Yeah.
the sort of response that they would give. So what would Mavard's response be to those sorts of people?
Well, for him, that would be excellent proof of orthogenetic evolution. Scaffolding is evidence of foresight. You're
Yeah.
doing something for the future. That's evidence for him. If they say that such thing existed, which there's no evidence for anyway,
Mhm.
then, well, you got to prove it first. You know what I mean? But anyway, that's foresight. That's the very thing they reject. So that's orthogenetic
Yeah.
evolution. So
Yeah.
from that, this is perfect. They're like, thank you for proving my point. So you
Yeah.
got that. So you got the irreducible complexity, just so stories, the evolution of multiple parts at the same time. Because explaining one part is a headache. Explaining multiple parts is basically impossible, especially when you believe it's purely random. All parts evolving in the same direction is when there's literally millions of directions, but they all go to that one bit where the giraffe has to get the long neck, the bone has to become denser. And in fact, he actually talks about the problem of the animal getting bigger because obviously they have to assume the giraffe was smaller. But remember, when an animal gets bigger, it gets slower, which makes no sense from a survival of the fittest because you're supposed to be fast and try to evade the prey. But here you are getting big, which makes you slower and you're eating leaves. You're not even eating any other animal. So for him, the whole thing just doesn't make sense. Once you just pick out this, just ruin the whole just so story, nothing makes sense. So he says, look, natural selection, although it's true and no one rejects it, nobody, but it does not explain what some people say the arrival of the fittest or the arrival of the species. It can explain why things remain, why things may get deleted, which no one really argued for. But anyway, that's great, but that's it. There's nothing else, to natural selection. There has to be more to it. There's direction. There is what appears to be foresight, like you said, the scaffolding. For him, this is evidence of God and divine guidance. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing about some of the contentions that he makes about, for example, the giraffe's necks or other physiological or anatomical features, they should be the same given that the environment is the same, given all things are equal.
Mm-hmm.
This
Mm-hmm.
is, for me, a pedestrian level criticism of Darwinism, which
Mm-hmm.
can be elevated to a scientific criticism if the right person says it. So, what I mean by this is that there are obvious problems with Darwin's theory, whether it comes to behavior or it comes to anatomy. But the reason why, even from pedestrian level, no one takes those things seriously is because the person doing the criticism doesn't have scientific credentials. But the points that they're making are the same points that people with scientific credentials are actually making. So in this case, the
Mm-hmm.
just so stories, or the very fact that if Darwinism is true, then we would see in nature XYZ. We don't see XYZ, we see XXX. We see
Yeah,
something
exactly.
totally different to what is predicted by the theory. The reason why I think this is important to highlight is because there's a lot of stonewalling that happens when it comes to criticism of Darwin's theory. The natural reaction of the Darwinists is, who are you? Where are you in the scientific literature? You haven't got peer reviewed papers. But the fact is, they are criticisms of Darwinian evolution that you'll find throughout the literature, saying the same sorts of things that a pedestrian level quibbler would say, which is,
Mm-hmm.
we don't see this. Why don't they all have the same length of necks? Why is it? What's the second example that you gave?
Which one?
You gave the example of the giraffes, and what was after the giraffes?
Well, I was saying like all the other creatures, let's say herbivores, for example, they should also have similar,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
selection pressure,
Given the same environmental pressures, they should have developed the same traits.
similar traits.
That's
Yes.
Yeah, similar traits. That is a very open thing for anyone to observe. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to be a scientist to recognize it. But here we have Mavard and others who are basically pointing out this doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. But then he does the opposite as well. He says that so we have creatures who live in the same environment yet they're radically different. But we also have the very opposite, which is animals living in totally different environment, yet they have similar structures,
Yes.
which again doesn't make any sense from an evolutionary perspective,
Okay.
especially if it's random. Yeah.
So here,
Homology, homoplasia.
yeah, let's bring in um, Simon Conway Morris's whole idea of convergent evolution, and all that great stuff about selection hitting upon the same solutions, natural selection discovering the same solutions in different contexts. That wouldn't make any sense either, because
Hmm.
in the same environment you have totally different traits.
Exactly, exactly. It's
Mm.
problematic no matter how you look at it. So
It's
either you just
it's beyond
ignore it,
homology and homoplasy, isn't it? It's beyond that.
is it?
This is a different beast of a problem.
Wh- What do you mean? I mean, he's saying two creatures with similar
No,
features.
so
Right.
let me articulate myself here. What I mean is that the standard Darwinist answer is, well, if this particular trait at a biochemical, anatomical, physiological level is similar due to common ancestry, therefore it's homology. If it doesn't fit the tree of life, it's due to homoplasy. But what he's
Oof.
saying here is, well, it's the same environment, but you're getting totally different species. So that they can't explain that
Oh,
using homology or homoplasy.
maybe Mivat does talk about maybe. I'm not sure, but yes, that's a third problem now as well. So you got
Yeah.
different creatures in the same environment, but they're so different. Creatures totally different environment, but yet similar features. And then the third one that you just mentioned as well, convergent evolution, where
Yeah.
where no, even on a genetic level, where you've got creatures, a frog and a frog, yet their genetics is so different. You expect them to be like 99% similar, but they're not. That's another. It's called the cryptic species. It looks the same, right? That's why it's cryptic. It looks the same, but genetically they're not the same, right? So from your eyes would deceive you basically.
Yeah.
So they call it cryptic species. So yeah, you're right. It's there's
Yeah. I mean,
multiple problems.
another thing that I think we should speak about, just to be clear, when we
Mm,
say adapt to the environment, right? We don't actually mean what we're trying to articulate. What the Darwinists are saying here, we don't actually say it adapts to the environment in real life. What the Darwinists mean is that those with the adaptations already survive, and those who don't, they die, and
they die.
therefore the
Yeah,
adaptation spreads. Because there's
yeah,
another misconception, you know, oh, we simply evolve um, against environmental pressure to develop these traits. It almost sounds teleological, right?
yes,
Directional. But the
hmm
Darwinist, like, it's not like that. It is death and randomness.
exactly. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
And another one is, although Mavat doesn't mention it, but Gould does mention it and try to sort of attach it with his punctured equilibrium. But his argument is the idea that an animal stays in the same place in order to adapt to it just doesn't make sense because the majority of animals they migrate. If an environment isn't suitable for them, they just migrate
Mm.
away. They go somewhere else. No, animals don't tend to remain in one spot. They move. You know what I mean, right? Mammals especially, we all move. Giraffes migrate. Elephants migrate.
Mm.
Right? You've seen videos of
Yeah.
giraffes all just, I mean, the elephants all just walking, moving around
Yeah.
and stuff.
So since you brought in Gould, I was actually going to mention Gould. I think it's important to bring him up again, although we've discussed him a few times. Is he someone that would be sympathetic to the type of criticism that Mavard was making?
Yes, 100%. He would obviously disagree with irreducible complexity and
The
stuff like this.
spirituality and, yeah, the
Yes, but
directionality and
he
stuff.
exactly, but he will still accept his view that species are stable, which is stasis, right? So because he does talk about stasis in, let me see which chapter is it now? It's called one second, species and space, right? So he talks about uh is it species and space? Wait, hold on a minute. Yeah, I think so. Either species and time or species and space, because they're next to each other in chapter 6 and 7. But he talks about stasis, that generally speaking, once an animal appears, the structure just remains. It just doesn't change anymore. It just stays there. But of course, according to evolution, it should change, right? Environment changes, well, so should your structure be. And if you say no to it, well, then you no longer believe environment has any effect, or at least it's not that important. Then you've rejected natural selection, which is a problem. So again, it's a dilemma. No matter what you say, it's just a dilemma. Now Gould, he wholeheartedly accepts the whole thing, right? He says, "All right,
So
stasis is real."
yeah,
Hmm.
so I think this is really important. Can you elucidate a little bit on that point about why
Okay,
that's such a significant point, that um, the plasticity isn't there the way that you'd
exactly.
expect it to be? There are forms which are
Yes,
not immutable, but they are, pretty um,
it's
like,
preserved. It's
yeah,
permanent.
preserved along lineages. Perfect. Yes, that's the
Yeah.
term I was looking for. Yep.
So the argument that Gould and others bring is that, look, you've got a creature that existed some 300 million years ago,
Yep.
and there's no way in hell you're gonna, gaslight anyone to believing that the environment hasn't changed. It has changed, but they haven't changed though. The body, when you look at it, it's basically the same. All right, forget the minute differences, and no one cares about it. We're talking about the general, like trilobites. Trilobites existed for many years, right? But there's no way that the trilobites in China and the ones in America lived in the same environment. No, they didn't. They lived in a very different environment, different predation, different pressures, but they all look very similar. We can tell the trilobites. This is very distinct. So he's saying, like many others, that stasis is a problem. If natural selection, the idea that environmental pressure has to change or change, your physical structure, then stasis shouldn't happen, but it happens a lot, not sometimes, not here and there, a lot, everywhere, right? We still have bacteria that's supposed to be billions of years old, but they're the same. There's no difference. Um, so yeah, so no matter how they answer it, it's a dilemma, right? You have to either accept that natural selection is no longer the sufficient cause, which a lot today do accept, by the way, or you just reject the idea that stasis happened. And so some try to do this by saying, well, maybe the structure didn't change, but the genetics has changed. Well, then that now ruins the whole idea of tree of life, because genetically speaking, supposedly the genes should change over time as well, and we should be able to trace it. But now you can't, because apparently the change doesn't always occur correctly. But anyway, that's a different dilemma. That's the genetic problems of tree of life. When you try to create a tree of life based on a very limited set of genes. Which genes is another headache as well.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you got Mivat and Gould and others who bring these points. Um, you've got obviously Wallace, and you've had Francis Cobb, Cobbe, Cobb, however you want to say it. Same thing. The reason why she's forgotten is because although she accepted evolution, but she rejected the moral basis of evolution. So these were like the critics that Darwin faced, and for him it was a headache. He just didn't know what to say, and Darwin, he did attempt to refute Mivat, and out of the many examples that Mivat gave, Darwin picks only two, misrepresents them, and then that's it. There you go. That's pretty much what Darwin had done.
Yeah.
So when it comes to like the irreducible complexity, Darwin responded to it, and he said, "Well, you're right, but maybe." Maybe once upon a time the system wasn't as complicated as the current system, right? So, like for example, a fish's eye maybe simpler than a human eye, right? But over time, that eye would have evolved. But the problem with that argument, which is the co-option argument anyway, the problem with it is it doesn't explain anything. Number one, the fish's eye is not or any eye really is not a simpler version of our eye or any other eye. It's
Yeah.
a completely different system, and that system in itself has to be explained. So the co-option model ignores the irreducible complexity argument. It ignores Mavat's dilemma to begin with. So that's what Darwin did.
Okay.
He
So
just completely.
can you? I mean, this is
Mm.
an important point that we didn't explain in detail. Why is it a dilemma? Because obviously, a dilemma is two bad options that a person's stuck with.
Well, if he says that, if he says it evolved from a simpler version or a simpler system, and yet he can't bring out that system, then that would mean that the system appeared by itself, not by evolution. So that's dilemma number one. The other dilemma would be that if you do accept, what was it? I'm trying to think of an example now. It's like what they're trying to say is that the Nokia, the brick phone Nokia, can
Yeah.
explain how the modern phone today, or what the modern sort of touchscreen phone is. But really, there aren't. They're two separate systems. You can't say that this, although it is a simpler version, and obviously through intelligent design, we brought something else. Okay, that's fine. Intelligence can explain that. But from a, let's say, materialistic perspective, you cannot explain the modern phone from this phone. It doesn't make any sense. They are two distinct systems. Just because you put it in a particular line where you put these phones here and that phone there, and then you just draw a line, that doesn't make, that's nothing. That's irrelevant, right? So what they're trying to say is, which is the co-option model. They say, well, this is simple. This is more complex. Draw a line. Like, no, it doesn't make sense, because when you have that, the structure, let's say the mobile phone, if you were to remove the main features of it, the phone no longer works. You can't break it down. You see, same thing with the Nokia phone. You cannot break it down. They have to explain how this thing was broken down bit by bit with function throughout time, but they can't do this. So what they do is they bring you one fully working system, another fully working system. They don't explain how you can break it down. They just draw a line, and then they'd be like, done, solution, finished, evolution is true. That doesn't explain anything. You've just ignored the problem. But yeah, that's basically it, really. So it's basically useful complexity. It's nothing different.
Sure. So with their arguments against irreducible complexity, would you say that this book from 1871 and the contentions from 2025 from the Darwinists against irreducible complexity is essentially the same sort of answers? The answers haven't really evolved. They've simply
Darwin,
just themselves.
Yeah, Darwin said it, and they just repeat it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to bring in here about forms, you spoke about forms being preserved over time, right? Through lineages. What if I was again to play devil's advocate and say, well, that's because of spandrels. That's because, there has to be trade-offs, and just like, a particular tractor that is repurposed to turn it into a tank. And, someone can do that. There's this guy in America some years back who, he turned this tractor or this truck into this tank, and he modified it. He put all these metal things around it. And then he went on a killing spree or attacking spree, and then was shot dead. So they would say, well, the previous forms constrict what natural selection has to work with, which is why these forms are preserved through lineages. That would be their response, right? What would Mavard's response be to that?
Well, his response would be the same. You believe that natural selection and environmental pressure is supposed to change everything. Well, it doesn't. These states exist. But in any case, once you make that argument that you've made, that means you agree stasis is real. That would mean you now agree that natural selection is no longer the sufficient explanation. The mechanism is just not there anymore. It's just when it suits you, you use it. When it doesn't suit you, you don't use it anymore, and you've got no predictions anyway. You cannot independently, without looking at the creature, tell me what should happen. You can't. You have to look at the evidence, and then you'd be like, here natural selection did this, and here, you know what I mean?
Yeah. You know what's interesting about this? I'm going to try and find a clip and play it. It's a talk I was listening to today. It's Dawkins' latest video, which he just uploaded yesterday. And the video was about new atheism, basically, is new atheism failing, whatever. And he said something really interesting. I'm going to try and, when you speak, bring out the clip and then we can play it. But what he basically says is, even if there's life elsewhere in the universe, the only way it could have come about is some sort of Darwinian natural selection. So even for a new world, a new planet, a new solar system, which is unobserved, the assumption is it has to be some form of Darwinism.
Exactly.
And it just goes to show you, if he's willing to make such a categorical blanket general statement for the universe. That's the type of idea that he would have for this planet. We haven't discovered many of the species in the ocean, but we know it must be Darwinism, right?
Exactly.
So that's the thing. It always boils down to, we know it must be some form of Darwinism.
It's the Darwin of the gaps, basically. They don't
Yeah.
know, but it has to be Darwin. It has to be Darwinism or evolution, or call it what you want. But yeah, you can find that clip. But you know, the influence of Mavart, Wallace, and many others, the influence or the impact it had led to what you if you said it before, the eclipse of Darwinism, right?
Yeah.
Darwinism as a mechanism died out. It died out very quickly as well. Even Huxley himself started believing in sort of a mutational or mutation-driven theory, where it's not really natural selection that explains everything. It's actually mutation. It's big mutations, you know, very quickly that changes the creature. So the impact of these guys led to what you call the eclipse of Darwinism, in which many countless of evolutionary theories just popped out of nowhere. Right? Many people had their own theory, they had their own understanding. Each one is using their own, you know, evidences and whatnot, trying to explain how evolution could possibly happen. But they are in agreement that it's definitely not Darwinism. It's definitely not what Darwin had said. Um, so that eclipse of Darwinism gives birth to many evolutionary theories. Then in after World War II, so 1950s, 1960s, there was multiple meetings trying to unite all these different,
Yeah.
you know,
So
yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Just before we get into the eclipse of Darwinism, and by the way, there's a really good book with the same title, The Eclipse of Darwinism by Peter Bowler, where he goes over these things. I want to share that clip with you because
Go
it's
for it.
so fresh in my mind, right? And it's not like he said this 10 years ago. This is the latest video, which he just uploaded on his channel. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. I think you can see that now.
Okay.
My neck out and think probably have their own Darwin as well, because I think that their own Einstein and Foucault. Yes. I think that's pretty obvious. Well, no, that's not obvious. They'll certainly have Newton. They'll have their own Newton.
He's talking about aliens. If there's an alien civilization, they'll have their own Newton, right?
Okay.
Yeah, Einstein and their own Max Planck. I would stick my neck out and think they would probably have their own Darwin as well, because I think that there is no other way for life to come into existence other than some form of Darwinian natural selection. They'll have mathematics. They'll have to have mathematics and physics. Or they...
Okay, so can you see what he's doing here? He is basically saying if there's another planet, right, and the other planet, they're going to have mathematics, right, which is a reasonable thing to say. They're going to have theories in physics similar to Newton, or Newton being around. Again, that's a very reasonable thing to say. But then he goes on to say they're going to have their own Darwin, because there's no other way life could have evolved except Darwinian natural selection. It just goes to show you the categorical mindset that these people have.
Exactly. It's just, for me, it's nonsense, but sure. What can I say? I mean, if here on Earth we have so many different ideas of how life began, and God knows what aliens would think.
Yeah,
if
you
they
know what's
exist anyway.
you know what's funny? There's a lot of debate about should the term Darwinism be used or not be used, but
And he used it, yeah.
Yeah, but not only did he use it, his latest book, The Genetic Book of the Dead, a Darwinian Riviere, and his previous book, A Darwinian View, River Out of Eden, or if you go to A Devil's Chaplain, where he speaks about universal Darwinism. So it's pretty clear that he will continuously specialize Darwin's contribution and call it Darwinism. and use it in the context of speaking about genetics, use it in the context of speaking about the gene-centric idea, the central dogma, and all the rest. Yet when we try and point out, well, evolution as a general theory is far broader than Darwinism, and that's when you get all the guardrails up and saying, no, there's no such thing as Darwinism.
Well, they're just afraid, isn't it? They don't like to. Well, the thing is that they deliberately do this. They know when we say Darwinism, we mean neo-Darwinism or whatever the context is, right? They know that. But for some reason, for whatever reason, right, they just have to pretend like, oh my God, you're using an old term. I mean, yeah, it's an old term, but it's a convenient term. It just makes sense, right?
Well,
Darwinism, right?
Yeah, here's another way. Here's another way of putting it, right? Darwin spoke about natural selection, and he spoke about natural selection working on variations. We today don't say variations; we say genetic mutations, random mutations. However, the crux of his idea, which is still the idea being pushed by the likes of Dawkins and other Darwinists, is natural selection is the generator of biological novelty. That is all from 1858 all the way to 2025. That's been a consistent claim of the Darwinists, right? What may have changed is they've added things about punctuated equilibrium, they've added things about the neutral theory, they've added things about all sorts of other side things, horizontal gene transfer and symbiogenesis and all the rest. Who cares? The crux of the matter is it is natural selection.
That's true, but you have to remember that there are also others who still evolutionists, and I mean, I wouldn't mind calling them Darwinists, but they reject or they just think natural selection is not that important. So they are the mutation-driven evolutionists. They believe in not necessarily orthogenesis. It's just they believe that it's mutation. There's this rare mutation that occurs, right? So it doesn't happen every day. It's just rare, and they could almost instantly change the creature in many ways, right?
Is this Goldschmidt's hopeful monsters you're referring to?
That's one of them too, yeah. And you got De Vries as well, Hugo De Vries.
Okay.
You've got the Japanese scientist. He died recently with his mutation theory as well.
Masatoshi Nai.
I think so, yeah. He believed in this idea that natural selection is like, yeah, whatever. It's more like mutation. Mutation explains everything.
Did he pass away? Oh wow, I didn't know that. He's the guy from he worked on population genetics, right?
Let me see. Maso.
He has a book called Evolution-Driven, Mutation-Driven Evolution.
Yeah, he died 2 years ago. Yeah, I was right. Yeah. So he wrote.
Right. I didn't know he died, but you know what's interesting about him is that I remember him saying that Darwin is a god in biology. You cannot question him, and we need this sort of dogma to be removed from science because science doesn't run on dogmas. And I thought that statement was quite profound when he said Darwin's a god, and if you challenge him, you're seen as arrogant. And obviously, he doesn't believe natural selection. I mean, again,
yeah, he does believe it, but like I said, he thinks it's almost irrelevant, secondary.
The way I would say it is because they basically, by they I mean the likes of Aaron Ra and Dave Farina and all these science charlatans or pretenders, what they would say is, oh, but no one denies natural selection, but natural selection as a background process, being a trivial selector between what survives and what doesn't survive, is very different to claiming natural selection created us body and mind.
Yeah, that's true.
Totally different, because I believe you are the first one who said this to me, that type of natural selection actually goes back even before Darwin. That was
it's just normal. It's just common sense. Of course, if you're not adapted to environment, you're gonna die. Who questioned it? Which fool ever thought otherwise? It's fact. It's common sense.
It's the most trivial definition of Darwinism, and they try and say, well, that trivial definition means everything else is fine.
Yeah, they extrapolate, and there's a problem. So stop extrapolating. We all agree on this. Everybody. No one did. Not even a young Earth creationist.
Young Earth creationist, 6,000-year-old Earth and everything.
Yeah, no one. Yeah, no one it's fact, of course, but can that explain the new structures, the new features? Can that explain
Yeah.
where you get a foot from, or a leg, or an arm? No, it doesn't. It explains why these structures are preserved, no problem, but they're already in existence. Oh, guess you're gone now.
No, I'm here.
Oh,
I'm here.
no, oh,
I just
so
went to go drink some, grab some water.
no
So
worries. But
it's
I looked
it's
at
not that- yeah,
Masayoshi Nai,
yeah.
and like I said, it says here the theory, his theory, which is literally no different to the other theories before him anyway, perhaps somewhat controversially, not really, but anyway, now the driving force of evolution is mutation, with
Yes.
natural selection being of only secondary importance.
I
Which,
bought this up. I actually bought this up in my debate with Aaron Ra. I remember mentioning Masayoshi Nai, but I think the mistake that I've made with him and with Farina and with all these other guys is that facts will change their minds. Like, or facts will even sway their audiences because they're not aware of these people. I mean, how can you interact with an idea if the first time you've heard of it is in a debate, because all your life you've just been reading off the Darwinian script and just soaking in all of that,
yep,
air. And it's so hard for you when someone opens the window and shows you new colors and says there's other stuff out there. It's just too much for
exactly.
you, you know?
Exactly. You have to limit it to what you already know, and of course, there's the problem. But the book continues here. It says, where is it? Where is it? However, the core of no, of this one. No, there was something else. Actually, no, I was right. Yeah. However, the core of the book is concerned with recent studies of genomics and the molecular basis of phenotypic evolution and their relevance to mutation-driven evolution, in contrast to neo-Darwinism, i.e., what we call Darwinism. Mutation-driven evolution is capable of explaining real examples of evolution, such as the evolution of olfactory receptors, sex determination in animals,
Yeah.
etc., etc. So all the main bits, because it's true, you have to explain how sexual organs had evolved. If you say it took millions of years, well then, well, first, the fact that they were reproducing without them means that it wasn't necessary. And if you say it happened millions of years, that means they were functional, but they were not doing anything. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So this guy's trying to say it was quick.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but Mavard's point could be, he didn't say this, but we could say this is his line of thinking, that bacteria are asexual and they can reproduce way faster and more efficiently than all humans. They survive in all environments, right? And since they are universal and they're spread everywhere, how does it make sense to go from asexual to sexual, and how does it make sense to go into more complicated organisms which don't reproduce so efficiently? Because the environment for bacteria is suitable everywhere and they survive everywhere. So why would we need more organisms?
Yeah,
That
that's the
is,
problem, natural selection.
yeah. So that's not what he said, but that's
So
his line of.
he would agree. He would say you're right, because natural selection goes in all directions, right? But all of the directions is negative. Yet somehow it happened. So then, therefore, it was directional. Somebody or something, whatever it may be, had pushed evolution in a particular way, right? That's essentially what his argument would be.
Yeah.
And then what else? In fact, when he speaks about stasis, which I should have mentioned before, actually.
Yeah.
When he says stasis, and Gould agrees with this, he picks this out and he really likes this example. He said, imagine an animal is like hexagon. Imagine a hexagon shape with 6 sides to it, right? Now, if you put a hexagon on one of its sides, it can sit there very comfortably and it won't move. It's perfectly fine, right? Small changes in DNA is simply not going to push this. It's going to stay there. If you just tap the hexagon, it's not going to flip. It's not going to go to the next side, right? It's going to stay in its position. For this thing to flip, you need to have that power. You need to have that external force to push, right? this is where they argue that this is when a mutation comes in. This is when, essentially mutation. So what they say is animals are stable. That's just the start. That's just what things are. That's how things are. They're very stable, like a hexagon. For the hexagon to change sides, something heavy needs to push it, and that heaviness is mutation. That is when a big mutation, not the small ones. No one cares about this. We all agree it happens. It has to be a big one that really affects the animal. And of course, the problem with this idea is that would mean that life shouldn't, or the prediction of life would be very different from how a neo-Darwinian who believes in strict adaptationism, whatever. So if you put it in a graph, it would be very different outcomes. Francis Galton, he promoted it. Mavat accepted it. Darwin sort of liked it, but didn't really speak much about it. And like I said, the reason why these mutation-driven theories appeared is because they accepted this. They were like, you know what, you're right. Stasis does exist. So maybe this idea of animals being like hexagon is correct. And if that's the case, then we should drop natural selection as a whole, or just make it secondary and tertiary. And we should just concentrate on mutation. This is where Goldschmidt and all the rest of them, sort of fit into this narrative. Then Gould comes in, he takes it and also explains stasis. So for him, animals are stasis, but when a major environmental change occurs, that's when this big mutations or these changes starts to happen because of the pressures that's around that. And Masatoshi and I would have agreed with this anyway. So this is normal for them.
Yeah. So bringing it back to Mavod, this is, I guess, the last question. We've gone on for about an hour now. I think this is an important question. So is he an anti-evolutionist in the strict sense?
No, he was an evolutionist, 100%. Like intelligent designers.
Yeah. So we would say he is a anti-Darwinian evolutionist, right?
100. Yeah, exactly. He said it himself. He says Darwinism is just a theory of evolution. There are other theories, and his theory is just different. But still, evolution is still the idea of, one origin and things start to evolve, tree of life and all of that. Just a different mechanism.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And what about his peers and his friends? How did they see him? How did the scientific community respond to his criticism of Darwin?
So what happened is that in the late 1960s, even before he even wrote published his book, because he was writing in the journals, but obviously in 1871 he publishes. But even before he
Sorry, you mean 1860s?
Yeah, late 1860s. Let's
say
1960s.
So yeah, you said 1960s, but so he published in 71. Darwin published in 1859. So the 1960s, this guy was active, meaning he was probably a big thorn in the side of Darwin.
Exactly, bit by bit. Initially, he accepted evolution, exactly what Darwin said. He fully accepted it. And like I said, he was saying to the Catholic Church, you have to change and all that kind of stuff. He was accepting it. But then bit by bit, he started to notice gaps, started to notice things that just doesn't make any sense. We see things that doesn't fit the Darwinian paradigm. He wasn't the only one. Wallace is another one. There are others as well. So he wrote, first praising Darwin and all that, and then bit by bit starts to critique Darwin. He then brings all these articles together, publish it in 1871. But I'm saying that even before he published the book, right, just him writing articles in some Catholic journals and scientific journals and whatnot, they were already having a problem with him. So you have to understand the reason why evolution emerged in the so-called scientific circles. It's not because all scientists just happen to be like enlightened and, oh wow, evolution is true, oh my god, Christianity is false. No. What happened is you had what we now call a lobby, right? It's a private group called the X Club who would
they were literally called the X.
Yeah, they call themselves the X Club. So the X here refers to the sound that you have with certain words like exquisite, excellent,
Mm.
uh, what else? Extravagant, whatever the words are, right? But you know that the X sound, right? So you have the
Mm.
extravagant Huxley, the excellent Lubbock, the X whatever the name, right? So they call themselves the X Club, and their wives were part of the Y Club. But anyway, so the X Club, right? They would they
Easy
who
enough over those.
no, I have to read. Where is it? Janet Brown. She really summarized it very well. So what Janet Brown says is that in 1869 also, Mivart parted company with Huxley and the close knit of Darwinians, coming to view the group as a dictatorial, self-regarding clique, a power brotherhood of older men at the summit of their careers who insisted that acolytes sought to adopt their position and advance the new biology in toto. So they have to fully adopt what they believe in, some sort of strict materialistic basic evolution. That's what it is, right?
Mm.
In many
Mm.
ways, Meva read the situation accurately. The inner ring of private clubs and societies which ran the scientific London, the X Club, the teaching laboratories, the museums in South Kensington, the philosophers, the parliamentarians in the Metaphysical Society, and the Athenaeum Club were closed to outsiders. Huxley enjoyed his clique and believed that small groups of right-minded men were by far the most effective way to get things done. So what she's describing is that there was a deliberate group of guys, right, who promoted certain people and not promoted other people, right, like Mavat and Wallace and others, in order to push their view of life, their version of evolution, or just their version of biology as a whole, right? This is basically like a lobby taking over a government or something, right? That's what it is, really. And that's how you had the change in at least in Europe anyway. That's how it happened. It didn't happen because, the way they tell you, oh, everyone just happened to agree evolution is true. No, no, it was more sinister than that. You
Mm.
had bankers who knew Darwin, right? You had bankers, politicians, guys in the biologists and others as well, right? Who deliberately promoted this particular idea. There's politics behind this. It's not purely scientific. It's politics, and it's very dirty as well. And
Yeah.
so Mavat didn't like it. For him, he wants the idea of just freedom. Let everybody just make predictions,
Do
and
you,
we'll find out what's
do
true.
you, okay, so do you think this was one of the reasons why he was such a problem for Darwin, because he was initially part of the narrative, then he moved away? I remember
Exactly.
uh, with Wallace, Alfred Russell Wallace, that initially he was with the program, and
Yeah.
then later on started doubting that the mind could be a product of natural selection. And then Darwin wrote to him in a letter saying, "Don't murder our child," because they
Yep.
both came up with the theory of natural selection. Although they came to independently, they published it together. And here you have Wallace moving away from attributing the mind to natural selection. And then he went into his own world afterwards of other stuff, which is irrelevant. Um,
Spiritualism. Yeah.
yeah, but the point is the contention that Wallace had after initially accepting the program is the same thing that Mavard's going through, because he accepted the program and then later on he started saying, well, this isn't right and that's not right.
Exactly. For them, evolution is just a scientific endeavor. If there's something that disproves it, we should talk about it. But for others, no, that's it. This evolution, what they call new biology,
Yeah.
that's it. This is the way, and there's no other way. That's it. My way or the highway, basically. That's it. There's nothing else. And so that's politics. That's not science anymore. This is blatantly taking over an institution. Even the Royal Society, they controlled it. Today, everybody talks about Royal Society, but its history is basically sinister, right? They were very happy with the journal Nature because it was almost irrelevant at the time. So they took it and then they promoted it and they published their work. And that's it. This is the paper for science. And everybody else has to agree with this, right? And if you don't, you're a you're a Catholic, evil, religious person who doesn't believe in science.
You know,
Literally.
what's so interesting is the demonization of the opposition is something that still goes on today. I remember very clearly Dawkins years ago. He used to continuously demonize, and he still does, the intelligent design movement, but he outright refused to engage with them. So
That's it.
he calls William Dembski one of the prophets of intelligent design, and then says how he's dishonest because he says something to his audience but also says something else, and he completely misrepresented Dembski. But what I found is that, at the same time that he's more than happy to go talk to creationists, he's more than happy to go speak to school children, he's more than happy to speak to members of the public, he will not engage with any intelligent design proponent in the same way that Mavard was ostracized and demonized.
Yep.
They do the same thing today. Nothing's changed in their playbook. There's nothing new under the sun. It's the same narrative, the same mechanisms of defense. I mean, if somebody was to say, and this happens all the time, we have these people today that claim that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, didn't exist, right? So they say that he's a myth to unite the Arabs. I mean, I would love to, and so would you. Yeah, would love to sit with them, and we would make a meal out of it. We would laugh about it and discuss with them and this and that, and we would use it as an avenue to explain who the Prophet is and all these types of things. We wouldn't say, I will refuse to talk to anybody who refuses to accept that he existed. It would be like, no, it's a goal. If you're so confident, why don't you let your ideas be tested in the real world, right?
Exactly.
Why are you so scared of allowing your pet theory to go under the microscope of evidence to be tested?
Yeah, that's what Mivart does. He says, let's put under the microscope and see what is correct. And if he's wrong, obviously refute him, no problem. That's fine. It's just okay. But they don't do that. Like I said, Darwin only takes 2 examples of from his work, misrepresents them, totally misrepresents them, and then pretends he refused them. And then he paid this other guy, which I haven't read his refutation anyway. I need to read it. But it was what's his name? In fact, the book is called Darwinism. That's the funny bit. Darwin funded another guy to write a book called Darwinism to refute Mavart. It's just amazing.
Really?
So
really? I didn't know that. Who is that guy?
His name is Chauncey Wright, and Darwin funded him. He literally gave money. He was like, "Hey, here's some information. Here's the money. Please publish this book. Don't put my name here, though. Like, don't put me as the author. Just leave it out."
So, what's the name of the book? Darwinism.
Literally, it's called Darwinism, being an examination of Mr. Saint George, Mavart's Genesis of Species.
So, do you know what this is like? This is like today. You have like the Zionists who are attacking the Palestinians, and then people are attacking the Zionists, and instead of the Zionists responding themselves, they go and pay someone. It's such a sneaky thing to do. It's such a I wouldn't say it's unethical. I would say it's just cowardly. No. It's cowardly. It's just so cowardly. And it's probably because 99% of the public doesn't know who Mavard is while Darwin's alive. 99% of the public today doesn't know who Mavard is. If Darwin responded to him himself, Mavard's ideas would have been more popular.
Exactly, but he does respond, but in the 6th edition of The Origin of Species. By then,
no way. So he actually responds to Mavard by reference.
So like I told you, he takes just 2 examples out of his book, just 2, misrepresents them, and case closed.
Does he say that this is Mavard?
Yeah, of course. By name, he mentions. He praises him. He says, "Look, he tries to refute me."
Okay, so that's good. Let's go over that. That's a really interesting point. Well, what are the ways that Darwin misrepresented Mavard?
So like I said, when Mavard talks about the irreducible complexity structures, what he's asking for is evidence that you can break these systems down because they must have been built up. Well, then that means you can break them down with function. But Darwin doesn't give an example of this. What he does is exactly what the evolutionists did with Michael Behe. It's literally the same trick. There's no difference. What they'll do is they'll just bring in a whole new system and be like, well, this is simpler, this is more complex, and then they draw a line. And it's like, mate, you can't do that. That's not evolution. Evolution doesn't work like this. You have to explain these two systems independently. The other example is what was it now? I think no. It's similar. It's still part of the irreducible complexity argument. But what Darwin says is, well, sometimes the structure, the feature that the creature has, let's say, for example, a wing, and in fact, Gould talks about this as well. Says, imagine a wing. Now, a wing is to fly, which, okay, makes sense. But maybe in the past, it was for heat regulation. So the function of the wing changed, right? So maybe when the wing was being developed, yes, you couldn't fly, but it was good for heat regulation, right? So what they're arguing here is the argument of functionality. The function has changed. So we think it's for flight, but really isn't. It was for something else, and then it changed for flight. So I think that's maybe like the best thing Darwin had ever, argued against Mavat, but that doesn't explain many other things like the neck. How did the neck of the giraffe evolve? The sexual organs, of course, the heart, the lung, the whole system, respiratory system, etc.
So let's slow down a little bit there. His response is not just a just so story, it's also an ad hoc rationalization, right?
Yes.
And I think no, I don't think, I know in The Blind Watchmaker, Richard Dawkins makes the same argument about birds.
Yeah.
It's always the same argument. So when they cannot explain something which is irreducibly complex, then they have to go with this scaffolding example. I mean, that's what it basically is, that initially it was there for warmth, right? Which doesn't, I mean, if you think about it, if you got wings, right, and they're saying it was initially for warmth and then later on it was co-opted for flight, why can't you just increase in your fur?
Oh yeah. I didn't think about this. Oh yeah, good point.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, you don't have to start flying. No, it's
the beautiful thing about Just So Stories is that you can reply back using another Just So story.
Exactly, and that's what he does.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to admit that what I just said right now is a Just So story, and it has no evidence. But the difference is Darwinists would never accept that.
No, they'll say it's a fact when there isn't. But even with the idea of heat regulation, even if we accept that, well, the wing still has to evolve to a certain degree for the heat regulation to even work. So why did it evolve in the first place? I guess there's no functionality in a, I don't know, 5% wing. What possible functionality could exist? It needs to be at least, I don't know, 50%, maybe. I'm just giving an example, maybe, so that the heat regulation thing could work. Even then, doesn't make any sense. But the point is that Darwin used this. So he used the argument of co-option and exaptation. We use these terms today, but obviously Darwin used different terms.
Exapted. Sorry, let me pronounce this correctly.
Exaptation.
Exaptation.
Yeah,
this is another fancy way of saying co-opted traits.
What do you mean co-opted traits?
As in something being co-opted, so it adapted under environmental pressures for this particular function, but now it was co-opted for another function.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. Yeah, because when I use co-option, I was referring to the idea of two systems, independently systems, but then they draw a line. That's what I meant before. But yeah, you're right. In that case, you're correct. It's just what it is. They use fancy terms, but it doesn't answer it doesn't remove the dilemma or the problem. It's still there. You know what I mean? So you can't say, oh, I use few letters, and then you're trying to explain from these few letters how a whole book was made. No, it doesn't make any sense. You need to have X amount of letters in order for it to make sense. You know what I mean? You can't have 1% book, 2% book, 3% book. It doesn't make any sense. It needs to be, I don't know, 20%. All right, maybe we sort of understand what the book is about. And then 30, 40, or whatever it may be. So they have to explain functionality at every single step. But it's impossible. You just cannot imagine something to have, functionality at these early stages or whatever stage it may be. And that's why, of course, like I said, you had these different evolutionary theories, because many evolutionists agreed. They said, yeah, this is true. And so therefore, mutation-driven theory or orthogenetic evolution or these crazy different evolutionary theories out there, just not new Darwinian, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Darwin didn't use the term exo-adaptations, did he? That's
think
the
so.
term I think Stephen Jay Gould came up with.
I don't know who came up with it, but he used it. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think in Spandrels of San Marco, that's when I first came across the term. And what was that, 1980s?
Potentially,
wrote that?
roughly. Yeah, around that. So that's when it became a big star, really.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. That's good. I think did you cover both of the strawmen that Darwin made of Mavard's work?
Yeah, yes, I did. So he does mention him, but in the 6th edition of the Origin of Species, by then, not many people would have read it, right? The main bit was the 1st and 2nd edition, and then over time, people just ignore the later editions. But he does try to respond, but he funded somebody else, and so the first time he funded somebody else to do it. But yeah, so I think Janet Brown, she calls it his biographer. She calls it his big guns. That's his big guns. He always funds somebody else to do the dirty work, basically, right?
Who's she again? She's a biographer.
Oh, she's a prominent biographer of Darwin. There are 3 main biographers. I'm not saying the others are bad, but there are 3 main.
Yeah.
So you got Adrian Desmond, James Moore, and Janet Brown. They're like the biggest one. You got the recent one, or when I say recent, I'm talking about almost 10 years ago now, which is A.N. Wilson. That's a good book as well. I forget what the evolutionists say about it. They misrepresent him many times, but his biography is good as well.
Okay.
Who else is there?
Janet,
There's others, yeah.
I haven't read Janet Brown. What year are we talking about?
Oh, she's alive still now.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
She's contemporary, but she wrote the biography like 20 years ago or something. But yeah, she still exists today. She still writes.
Okay, maybe I can reach out to her and get.
No, trust me. No, look what happened. Yeah, I once sent her an email years and years ago. Okay,
Right.
and I swear I'm not making this up. I swear down. When she replied to my email, I was just talking about Wallace and group selection, and she said to me, for me it was just fascinating. She said, I need to know your details, your name, your address, everything. And I was like, what the hell? Why? I'm asking the question. And she said that creationists use my information, so I need to know who I'm talking to. So I gave the information, no problem. And I'm not going to use her email or anything. It's, I won't. I keep my promise. But for me, it was just.
I don't get it. It's so interesting. I was reading the book, The Selfish Genius, by Fern something Baker, right?
Selfish Genius.
The Selfish Genius, yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Actually, let me just show you the book. 1 second. It's actually a really good book.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah. So basically, this book came out a few years ago. Let me share my screen so we can show it. So, The Selfish Genius: How Richard Dawkins Rewrote Darwin's Legacy. Right?
Oh, no. I know that. Yes, I know this. No, I do know this. Yes. I haven't read it, but
yeah. So basically, one of the things that she writes in there is that she doesn't want to be used by creationists. The thing is, even if a creationist, wasn't to refer to her, they always use this thing. Oh, I didn't really say that. I'm being misrepresented. Obviously, she didn't say that, but that's generally their defense, right? By the mere fact, that she's written a book called The Selfish Genius, talking about how Dawkins has basically misrepresented Darwin and he rewrote his legacy, right? That in of itself is fodder for creationists to use, for intelligent
Exactly.
design proponents to use.
Yeah.
Because for us, right, for us, we merely need to show that Dawkins is not an honest debater. He's not an honest public speaker. He is not up to date with his field. And all of these things, you know, people like her point out. He's misrepresented Darwin in this case or whatever. So, you know, it's quite funny because these people, they don't want to be used by the creationists, but at the same time, they literally say things which creationists are going to jump
Gracious
on.
will use.
Another one,
Exactly.
another one is Henry Gee, right?
Yeah. But
So
before you carry
he's
on,
the editor of,
just
yeah.
sorry, just turn your camera, put it back on because it's very blurry, and then carry on with Henry Gee.
What about
Oh,
now?
it's still blurry. I don't know what's wrong with the camera. It's like
The
it's like
hell happened to the camera?
240p now.
What the hell? Oh,
No,
it's probably the
you know
internet, man. This
you remind
what
me of the
the hell happened?
Turin shroud now. You know the shroud that Christians use, supposedly with Jesus' face on it. That's
What
what I
about
remember
now?
now. Oh, 360p now.
Look
I mean,
at my beard.
all right, okay.
All right.
All right, you carry on. Henry Gee.
So Henry Gee, right? So he basically says many things which are in favor, if you like, of the creationists, right? In his book Deep Time, in his book Misunderstandings of Evolutionary Theory, he speaks about how popular conceptions of evolution are incorrect. Obviously, he's an evolutionist. Obviously, he believes in universal common ancestry. Obviously, he believes in Darwin's ideas. But he's pointing out misunderstandings and misrepresentations and all these other types of stuff. And then again, in his book, he says he doesn't want to be used by creationists. Well, if you don't want to be used by creationists, then don't open your mouth about the problems with Darwinism, or
Exactly.
not the problems with Darwinism, the arguments being used using the fossil record, which can't be used, which are incorrect, or whatever it is. Or in her case, don't criticize Mr. Dawkins because he's seen as the main neo-Darwinian proponent in the world. So if you're going to criticize him, we could literally, I mean, I've read the book from cover to cover, but we could literally use the cover. And we could say, well, here you go. Here you go. This guy's not trustworthy. Look what he's doing. So I don't understand these people. They're like, oh, you know, they write something which blatantly challenges narratives that people like Dawkins are pushing out or others are pushing out. And then when they're cited, they're like, oh, don't use me, you creationists. And in your case, you know, tell me exactly who you are and what were you going to do? You were probably like, for example, right now, you use the fact that she pointed out that Darwin used someone else to respond to Mavard. Right?
Oh no, but no, that was in her book. This is not the email. But like the email was just about Wallace and group selection. Very irrelevant topic.
Yeah, but she writes that, isn't it? She writes that.
In the book, in her book. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, in a book, yeah. So why would you write something like that if you don't want intelligent design proponents to use it?
Fair enough.
It shows it's basically throwing shade on Darwin. It's basically saying the guy was not man enough to respond himself. He paid some other random guy to write a book in his defense, which is a really sneaky move to do.
I guess Darwin was a smart guy. He's always, just keep his name out of the public. But anyhow.
Anyway, my internet. Next time I'm going to plug in the internet. I'm not going to use this silly Wi-Fi thing. I'm going to plug it in directly, inshallah. All right, let's end there. Any concluding comment on Mavard?
Well, I think you should read the book. The book is amazing. Because I really enjoyed reading this book. I haven't reached the bit about theology and evolution. Basically, how the church and evolution can fit together. For me, that's not really the main bit, really. So, but still, I should read it. So the book is great. I think people should read it. It talks about many things. In fact, you start to notice all the arguments that creationists or just anti-evolutionists bring is not really any different. It's the same. Things are just being crystallized since the 1880s. Really, nothing has changed. It's the same thing till now. and
Yeah.
we just go in circle. Do you know what I mean? Others, they try
Yeah.
to obviously go beyond the circle. They try to really push for new theory, new narratives. But the majority would just go in circles. So I think, yeah, people should
Absolutely.
read the book.
Absolutely. I switched off my camera just so that
No
the
problem.
yeah, the sound quality is good. So
Yeah.
this is like, when we met up a few weeks ago at your place, this was the first book you wanted to cover. And
Yep.
maybe you can explain to the viewers as we end this, like, why did you choose this book to begin off our series on?
Well, the reason why is because number one, he existed when Darwin existed, right? This is an early response. You can read when you read it, he explains natural selection, he explains these ideas in very simple terms. So he's not like making things up. That's number one. So he was contemporary of Darwin. He not only did he respond to the origin of species, but he also responded to animals and the plants under domestication. A lot of people don't read that book. In fact, I haven't read the book. So he really read Darwin's works, a lot of it, right? And he made notes. Took him 10 years to explain why he disagrees with Darwin. So because he was a contemporary of Darwin, for me, it was just the perfect guy. Like I need to read this guy to see what he says. And for me, because I like to read the like how evolution has changed over time, he's one of the best people to start with. Him and Wallace, because they obviously provide this new narrative, this new way of thinking. And then obviously you sort of go into sort of progress through time. You got Hugo de Vries, Goldschmidt, Gould, and then obviously Ernst Mayr as well, right? And then you got basically Dawkins, and then our time, really, right? And then today, there are again so many different theories that some people haven't even heard of. They're mentioned in journals and books and stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, here we are. We're back to square one. We're not any different than the 1880s. It's the same thing, just maybe new discoveries, new words, but it's the same ideas.
Mm,
Mhm.
absolutely. That's a really good way of ending it. Inshallah, I'll have you back to cover another book soon. And
Inshallah.
yeah, Jazakallah khair. That was a really good session. That was quite fun as well.
I'm glad. All
It's
right
it's,
then.
it's always it's always fun to bash Darwinism, and you know, and it's almost like, shall I tell you what it's like? It's kind
So
of like challenging Hinduism, and I've been quite interested in stuff about Hinduism now, challenging Hinduism's narratives, not Hinduism, Hindutva's narratives, using their own ideas. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. Um, when the early Muslims went to India, one of the things that they did is they smashed up Hindu temples and they made masajid out of them, right?
correct.
And the Hindutva is saying, "Oh, look how cruel and evil this is," except that there's a historical fact which is missing. The
That
the
is.
reason why they, yeah, the reason why they did that is not because they just decided to do something random. Is because the Indian tradition has always existed in the subcontinent of rival Hindu factions. When they conquer each other, they make new temples out of the old temples. That's like
Yeah,
an
they have to
Indian
destroy it.
tradition.
No, they have
Yeah,
to destroy
that was
that temple. That's right.
yeah, and they have to make the new temple using the old temple's pillars because that's a sign of domination. So, if
But not
anything,
just that.
yeah,
Even in Iran, it was the same thing.
yeah, exactly. So, if anything, you know, it was the Hindus which inspired the Muslim invaders to apply this new tactic.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, it's true. Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, yeah,
That
it's
was their
true.
way of basically what the way it worked is you've got two groups, so two Hindus basically. Because remember, Hinduism isn't the same. The today Hinduism isn't the same as last as years ago. Things have
Oh,
changed
no
over
way.
time as well. Yeah. So, but at that time, you have two groups of what we call Hindus, and each group would have a temple. Each temple represents a god. Now, for you to defeat that god, you have to defeat the place of that god. Do you see? That's just the lot. That's
Yeah.
just how it is. So, I mean, there's no evidence of the Muslims done it because the Hindus do it, but we could argue very clearly that, well, you guys do it, so guess we could do it. Do you know what I mean? But
Yeah, yeah. I
thing
mean,
is,
if
thing is,
anything, it just
no, the
it
thing is,
just destroys the narrative that we brought something new to the subcontinent.
that's true, yeah. And also, if it was about destroying temples, I mean, there was only like what 30, 40 temples that were destroyed. But anyway, if you look at like a lot of the temples that remain today, I mean, a lot of them were under the Muslim rulers, but they never destroyed it, and they were big temples too. Because I remember I was reading, what's this guy called?
Yeah, I mean,
John Key.
yeah, I mean, just
Yeah.
it's just on that idea. Just before we move on, the numbers of temples I think is very hard to verify. It could have been thousands, it could have been hundreds. We don't know. But one thing we do know, and I'll tell you this from my own experience, right?
It's tens, less than 100, because you know what's his name? Your friend, your Adnan Rashid, him. He
Yes.
recommends Richard Eaton. Eaton wrote a paper on the destroyed temples, and he basically mentioned like a few dozens. And then I emailed him, and he said, "Okay, you're right. There's a few of them more as well. At best, less than 100. More than 50,
Okay.
less than 100."
But let's just stretch out this argument and accept their nonsensical narrative that it was thousands. Okay. What we need to understand is that the demographic of India was changing. So, for example, I just recently came back from Kashmir, right?
Oh, yes,
Kashmir was, yeah, Kashmir was a valley which had Hindus and Buddhists, right?
correct.
Now, when the Muslim preachers came from Central Asia and they came from Persia, and you had Turkic influence and you had Arab influence, you had Mughal influence, all of these influences came over the centuries since the 14th century. Lots and lots of indigenous Kashmiri people became Muslim. For
Yeah.
example, my mom's side of the family is Rajput, right? So my dad's side of the family claims descent from Arabia, from the Abbasids, but my mom's side of the family are Rajput, and they actually are indigenous Indians, right? Now,
Yes.
why are they Muslim? They are Muslim because they chose to be Muslim, and a lot of Rajputs today are Hindu. Only a
Correct.
minority of Rajputs are Muslim, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one thing they fail to address is, why is it that Hindus converted to Islam? And they did in large numbers. Now, 2 points to be made. Number one, the conversions happened. Number two, the Hindus that didn't convert were not slaughtered en masse. They were allowed to stay,
No.
right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So their
No,
entire
not
narrative just
not just stay, but they could also build. That's the main bit as well. Because I've got the book here with me, but yeah.
Yeah, which by the way, Islamically, from my understanding, under an Islamic empire, they're not allowed to do anyway. So, Christians and Jews, we have a similar sort of, we believe in prophets and stuff, right? So their churches and their synagogues, which already exist before conquest, they're allowed to maintain
Yeah.
those, right?
Yeah.
However, in this particular case, there was no obligation on the Muslims to not destroy all these pagan temples, especially because all these people are converting. So, the whole Hindutva narrative, it absolutely
victim.
breaks apart when you look at the reality, the historical record. And what's so sad about the situation is that not only does Bollywood go against historical facts, if you look at the movies that they're producing against Aurangzeb and against all these Muslim leaders, it also goes against physical facts and the laws of physics, because if you look at the movies, they show these Hindus as these super heroes which are flying through the sky, jumping out of the water, and you're like, what the hell is this? What the hell is this? Yeah.
That's well. Look at that. So you're right, but actually, just sort of connected to like evolution, right? Do you know what they believe about the origins of humans? It started in India,
I think
so they believe in out of India theory. I'm not
No
even gonna
way.
like. I'm not even gonna like.
Oh, no
judge.
way.
I'm not making this up. I swear to God, I read it.
That is hilarious. All right. On
Yeah.
that note, Jazakallah khair. We'll catch up
No
again.
worries. Inshallah. All right.
Jazakallah khair, bro. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.